Okay, so get ready because today we are going on a journey. We're headed to Shearwater Island, this tiny, isolated place stuck between Tasmania and Antarctica, and it's where Wild Dark Shore takes place. And honestly, the book review I read totally had me hooked from the very first line.
It's so interesting how this island setting almost instantly becomes this like microcosm of all our climate anxieties, right? It's not just remote, it's being swallowed by the sea, literally.
Yeah, it really does feel like this ticking time bomb, and the Salt family who lives there, they're racing against time. But it's not just the rising tides they're fighting, they're also the guardians of something pretty incredible, a global seed vault.
It's almost like, I don't know, a biblical idea, preserving these blueprints of life as the world outside could be falling apart. But it's different than, say, Noah's Ark, because this vault speaks to a very real fear, a fear we have today about losing so much biodiversity to climate change.
Okay, so let's recap. Rising sea levels, a remote island, a family protecting all of plant life's future. Sounds like a pretty good setup for a book, right? But then McConaughey throws in another twist. The Salt family themselves.
Oh, yeah. They are not some, like, picture-perfect family unit at all. Each one of them, Dominic, the father, and the kids, Raph, Fen, and Orly, they're all keeping secrets and dealing with past traumas. You get the sense that they're just as isolated from each other emotionally as they are from the rest of the world physically on this island.
It's like their past, their history, it's another tide that's rising and threatening to kind of drown them. But then just when you think, okay, things can get more complicated, a storm hits. Literally and figuratively. A woman named Rowan shows up.
And the way she's introduced, oh my gosh, it's so powerful. She just washes ashore during this crazy storm, and instantly you just know she's going to be a disruptive force, right? Almost like the island itself is spitting her out, rejecting her.
Wow, yeah, I like that. So now we've got isolation, climate anxiety, a family on edge, and this total mystery woman. Talk about a recipe for suspense. But what I think makes Wild Dark Shore so fascinating is how it takes these elements and layers them with deeper themes.
I think one that really stood out, to me at least, was this idea of duality, especially with nature. McConaughey portrays the island as, like, both a sanctuary and a threat at the same time. It's
Yeah.
where the Salt family gets their food, but it's also obviously going to swallow them up with these rising tides.
And it's not just the island, though, is it? The characters have this duality, too. Like, take Dominic. He's so dedicated to protecting life in the seed vault, but he's also got this huge secret he's keeping that's really eating away at him.
Yeah, it's like McConaughey's saying that destruction, like, has to happen almost for there to be rebirth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Both for the environment and for the characters themselves. There's just this constant push and pull between, like, hope and despair, beauty and decay.
Which makes me think about another theme. This power of the unknown, of what we don't know. And Rowan, she represents this perfectly. We have no clue about her past, why she's on the island, what her motivation is, and that just keeps you guessing.
Right, and it's like she represents everything that the Salts have been trying so hard to bury, to suppress, like their fears, desires, all their secrets. And because she's there, now they have to face all of this stuff they don't want to deal with.
Maybe this is a good time to talk about what the book reviewer said about the strengths and weaknesses of the book. One thing they really liked was how Wild Dark Shore blends literary fiction with a plot that grabs you. So it's not just a thriller, it's a story that, like, makes you actually think.
Totally. McConaughey's not afraid at all to, like, dive into these complex issues.
Yeah.
Climate change, family issues, our human need for connection. But she does it all in a way that keeps you entertained while also being thought-provoking.
The reviewer did mention, though, that the pacing might be a bit slow for some people who are used to a lot of action. They called it a, quote, slow burn, which I guess could be a negative if you're not into that kind of thing.
For me, though, that slower pace is exactly what builds the tension so well. It gives you time to really, like, soak up the atmosphere of the island. You get to know the characters better, and you really feel that sense of dread, about the threat that's coming.
And there are so many really interesting details that I'm not going to spoil, obviously. But one thing I have to mention is McConaughey's writing style. It's so descriptive, almost like poetry sometimes. You can practically smell the ocean and feel that wind.
Right. It really does make the island feel like it's another character, like this powerful, almost living thing that's both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It just leaves you wondering, is this island a safe place or a trap? And who's going to survive when it inevitably changes? So welcome back to our deep dive into Wild Dark Shore. When we left off, we were talking about that uneasy duality of the island, right?
Yeah.
How it's both a refuge and a threat, all at once.
And how that same kind of tension is happening inside the Salt family too, huh? I mean, they're trying to save seeds for the future, but their past is kind of haunting them.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where I think McConaughey's take on self-sufficiency gets really interesting. The Salts have this totally off-the-grid life. They live off the land, almost like they're prepping for, like, the end of the world. But when Rowan shows up, their carefully built world starts to fall apart.
It's like she exposes these cracks in their self-reliance, right? And
Yeah,
not just practically like needing help in the storm and all that, but on a much deeper level.
totally. Like, she makes them face their weaknesses. Think about Fenn, for example. He's obsessed with prepping for disaster, hoarding supplies, but Rowan coming to the island triggers this almost primal fear in him. Makes you wonder if all that prepping is more about him wanting control, rather than actual survival.
That's a really good point. It's like his being all self-sufficient on the surface is actually hiding this deeper fear of the unknown, the stuff he can't control. And this idea of control, it seems like it pops up a lot in the book, huh?
Oh, absolutely. Every single member of the Salt family is wrestling with it in their own way. Dominic and his secrets, Raph wanting to escape the island, even Orly quietly rebelling against her dad.
And then there's Rowan, right? She just appears with practically nothing but the clothes on her back, yet she has this inner strength, this resilience that the Salts seem to be missing.
It's almost like McConaughey is turning the whole idea of what it means to be self-sufficient on its head. It's not just about stockpiling food or knowing how to survive in the wild. It's about emotional strength, being able to adapt, facing your fears, and connecting with other people.
Which reminds me of another big theme the reviewer mentioned, family bonds and generational secrets. I mean, it's not a spoiler to say the Salt family has a ton of baggage.
Oh, for sure. And the island setting, it just makes that feeling of being trapped even stronger, not just by the rising water, but also by their shared history. Their past traumas are like ghosts haunting them and keeping them from moving on.
There's this one scene that really stuck with me. Dominic's thinking about bringing his family to the island, and he says something like, I thought we could get away from the world here, but I brought our demons with us.
Oh, that line is so sad. Because it shows how you can't really run from your past, no matter how hard you try. And the book really explores how secrets, especially those passed down through generations, can totally shape who we are, the choices we make, even our relationships.
It's like they're all carrying this invisible weight, this legacy of pain and guilt. And until they face those demons head on, they can never truly be free. And then Rowan walks in, and it's like she's holding up a mirror to all their problems.
She becomes this, like, catalyst for each of their journeys of self-discovery. Because she's there, they're forced to question their beliefs, their roles in the family, even their own identities.
But it's not just about looking inward, right? The reviewer also praised Wild Dark Shore for its suspenseful plot. It keeps you on the edge of your seat, throws in some unexpected twists.
Yeah, and that's where the whole eco-thriller aspect really comes through. You have the rising sea level as this constant looming danger. Then you have the family drama going on. And woven throughout it all, this mystery surrounding Rowan. Who is she? What does she want? Is she a friend or an enemy?
I gotta admit, there were times when I was so caught up in the suspense that I almost forgot about the deeper stuff going on. But then McConaughey would throw in these really insightful observations, these little bits of wisdom that made me pause and think.
That's what I admire about her writing. She manages to blend those deeper layers into the story so smoothly. It doesn't feel preachy at all. It feels natural, like these insights are just coming directly from the characters and what they're going through.
And it's not just the big themes either. The reviewer also pointed out McConaughey's writing style, how lyrical it is. It's like she elevates the language itself, making the story even more immersive.
What I find fascinating is how she uses language to create this almost physical atmosphere. You can practically feel the dampness in the air, the wind, the isolation of this tiny island at the edge of the world.
And she doesn't shy away from describing the harsh reality of climate change either. There are these incredibly vivid descriptions of the sea encroaching, the coastline eroding, this sense that the island is slowly disappearing.
It's not just a setting, it's an active player in the story. It's like a constant reminder that our world is fragile and our actions have consequences. And it makes you think, who will survive when things inevitably change? And what will the world look like after that?
You know, as we're talking, I'm realizing that Wild Dark Shore isn't just a story about surviving. It's a story about resilience. The resilience of the human spirit when we face challenges, both internal and external.
And the resilience of nature itself, too. Even though the island is being threatened by the rising water, there's still this sense that life will find a way, that nature will adapt and evolve. It's a message that's both sobering and hopeful at the same time.
Speaking of hope, We haven't really touched on the ending yet, and I have to say, without giving anything away, it's one of the most thought-provoking endings I've come across in a while.
It's definitely not a simple, tidy ending.
Oh.
It leaves you with questions, but it also offers this glimmer of hope, this feeling that even when things are lost and destroyed, there's always a chance for renewal.
And that's what makes Wild Dark Shore such a powerful and relevant book for today. It makes us face the hard stuff, climate change, family issues, finding meaning in a world that feels so chaotic and uncertain. But it also reminds us that hope, resilience, and human connection are powerful forces.
It's the kind of book that sticks with you long after you finish it. And I think that's a sign of truly great storytelling, when it makes you think, challenges your views, and leaves you with a sense of wonder and possibility.
Well, I don't want to get too deep here, so maybe we should move on to the last part of our deep dive.
Yeah, good idea. We still have a few mysteries to untangle, like Rowan's role in all of this.
Stick around because in part 3, we'll be tackling those final pieces of the puzzle and sharing some last thoughts about what makes Wild Dark Shore such a captivating read. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Wild Dark Shore. And it feels like we've just barely scratched the surface, even after talking about it for so long.
It's definitely one of those books that keeps revealing more the more you think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like peeling back layers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big part of what makes it so good.
Speaking of uncovering things, in the last part, we were just starting to touch on the ending. And I gotta say, McConaughey doesn't wrap everything up neatly. Not at all.
Yeah, she leaves a lot of questions unanswered, which I know can be frustrating for some readers.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think that ambiguity is what makes it so powerful. You're left thinking about the choices the characters made and what might happen next. It's not just over when you close the book.
Right, exactly. It's like she wants us to keep the story going in our own heads. And one of the biggest questions I'm left with is Rowan's real purpose. We talked about her being a catalyst, a disruptor, but I still can't figure out if she's ultimately a good or bad influence. You know what I mean?
That's what's so brilliant about how she's written. She's not easy to put in a box.
Yeah.
At all. Strong and vulnerable, selfless and manipulative. She brings this sense of hope, but also all this chaos. It's hard to pin her down.
I was rereading some parts of the book to prep for this, and I noticed how much water imagery there is. I mean, it's obvious, right? The rising sea, the storms, ruin washing up on shore. But then there are these more subtle times when water is used as a symbol for change, for cleansing, for the unknown, for all this stuff.
Such a strong metaphor, and it ties back into that whole duality theme we keep coming back to. Water can give life, but it can also destroy it, right? It sustains us, cleanses us, but it can also drown us, wipe everything away in an instant.
And that's kind of how I see Rowan, like this force of nature that could heal the salts, but could also destroy them. She makes them confront their past, but she also brings danger and uncertainty to their lives. It's hard to know which way it will go.
And in a way, I think that reflects the bigger theme of climate change, too. Those rising sea levels, they're a threat, but they're also a reminder of how connected everything is. It's a force that can completely reshape our world, maybe for the better, maybe for the worse. Who knows?
I also think it's interesting that the book review specifically called Wild Dark Shore an eco-thriller, because while the environmental stuff is definitely central, it's not like a preachy book or anything. It's not trying to beat you over the head with a message.
Absolutely. McConaghy isn't like lecturing you about climate change. Instead, she weaves those themes into the lives of the characters, their relationships, which makes the story feel personal, relatable, and also universal, all at the same time.
And she's honest about the human impact of environmental damage, too. The salts are dealing with a very real threat, and their struggle to survive, it's both sad and inspiring. It makes you think about what really matters.
Right. It's not just about staying alive. It's about what we choose to hold on to, what we value when we're faced with loss. The seed vault, it becomes this symbol of hope, of believing that even when things are really bad, we can still try to build a better future.
And I think that's the heart of what makes Wild Dark Shore so powerful, so relevant to what's happening in the world today. It's a story about facing your fears, dealing with your past, and finding the strength to hope for something better, even when things look bleak.
It reminds us that even as the world changes, and sometimes it feels like it's changing too fast, we still have choices. We can choose how we respond, how we adapt, how we connect with each other, with the planet.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key things you hope our listeners take away from Wild Dark Shore?
Let's see. First, don't let the label eco-thriller scare you off. This book will stay with you, not because it's full of cheap thrills, but because of the characters, the way they're written, and the big questions it asks about family, about resilience, and our relationship with the natural world.
I love that. And second, I think it's a reminder that even when you're facing huge, maybe impossible challenges, there's always hope. Hope for change, hope for connection, for a future where we can learn from our mistakes and maybe create a world that's more sustainable, more compassionate.
That's beautifully put. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into Wild Dark Shore. It's been a pleasure exploring this book with you all.
Yes, thank you for joining us. And we hope you'll check out the book yourselves and discover all its secrets. Until next time, keep diving deep.